Hi, everyone. We are right at 2 o'clock, but we're going to wait just a minute and give everybody a second to join us, although it looks like our numbers are already quite good.
Good. Hi.
How are you, Julie?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing well. Doing very
Good.
well.
Looks like a beautiful sunny day.
It is. But not quite warm enough for you.
Yeah, if we add another, let's see, 40 degrees, I'm really comfortable.
Which is good, because I would be hiding inside in the air conditioning.
I do keep my AC at 85. That's
Fair
about
enough.
perfect.
All right, Steve and Emily, what are we thinking? A couple more minutes?
Looks like we've got pretty good, I think a pretty good number.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's not quite as fun as our last meeting outside, but it's great to see everyone. And we have a really exciting agenda with lots of important things going on. And so, as always, thanks to you all for supporting Sustainable Carolina and all our activities at the university. So we'll start off with some welcomes. We have new undergraduate student members, and they are Ella and Jake. And I'm just looking to see who is here. I see Ella is here. If you all would, I thought that maybe Jake was going to be here, but that he had an exam tomorrow, but I couldn't remember well. Ella, why don't you start us off? Just say hello and things you like to do, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Ella. Jake and I are the co-directors for environmental affairs for undergraduate student government, and he couldn't be here today on account of, I think, a final exam study session. But yeah, we have been working with Mike Peeler on some things this semester and with Jimmy, and this is the first year that we've had a branch for environmental affairs, so we're really excited to kind of break into that and start getting the work done with that at the student government level. And yeah, really excited to be able to be here today to share insight and learn a little bit more about the council and be of help wherever we can be. And yeah, just some background on me. I'm an environmental studies and economics major. Jake is a business major, and I believe also environmental studies. So yeah, that's kind of the angle that we're coming from. But yeah, very excited to be here. Thank you for introducing us, Mike.
Absolutely. And thank you for being here. And we'll talk about the material contributions you all are making already. It's been a great start, I think, or we're not really starting at this point, but a great event. So what we have this time is Jake and Ella sharing a seat, sort of, both participating when they can and want, but it made sense not to pick one or the other of the two undergraduate student representatives, but rather to do both. And so we had a good meeting about how that might work. And today we were making that work. So next up, Julie, I'll ask you to introduce yourself, even though it's not your first meeting, but there were relatively few of us at the last meeting when we were doing our tour.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Jacobson-Van, and I teach in the School of Nursing at UNC, and I have a nursing background, but also focus a lot on health policy, health economics, health finance, and public health. And my passion is environmental health and greening of healthcare. So I'm quite active now in Carolina Advocates for Climate, Health, and Equity, which was previously called North Carolina Clinicians for Climate Action. And I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks.
Great to have you. Julie has definitely hit the ground running. We'll talk about a handful of things that she's been involved in, but it's really exciting to have someone on the health side of town who's willing to help us try and engage in the areas that we officially cover and also have outreach to UNC Health, even though it's a separate organization. It seems like it would be a smart thing to at least coordinate. So thank you, Julie, for being here.
You're welcome.
And then
My pleasure.
Not least, absolutely. Last but not least, Langley Smith. We're excited to have our final spot in Sustainable Carolina filled, and Langley has been with us for a few weeks now, or is it even a month? It might be close.
A little over a month.
Nice.
Hi, I'm Langley. I am a recent grad out of UGA. My background is in political science, but my passion really lies in like sustainability and like environmental policy. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I've been working on some exciting programs, and yeah.
Great, thank you. And thank you to Melanie for reminding me that Adelia's first meeting was last one also. So it'd be great to have Adelia say hello. And she's presented to us as an RESPC representative, but Adelia, please.
Hey, it was really nice meeting some of you in person last meeting, but to those of you who don't know, I'm Adelia. I'm a senior majoring in environmental sciences on the QES track and statistics and analytics. So I've been on RESPC all 4 years, but I've been the co-chair for the last 2. And I've also been on student government on environmental affairs for my first and second years. So I'm pretty familiar with the environmental sphere from like a student's perspective. So I'm really excited to see what everybody else has been doing, and I'm really honored to be part of the community. So thank you.
Welcome. And the picture behind you reminds me to apologize to Jimmy for having conflict with the German football match. So fingers crossed this will be good luck. If you have something else going on, at least it's my superstition. Keep doing what you're planning on doing, and then good things happen in the sporting world. Although that has not been working that well with our Tar Heels lately. But that's a topic for, except for the women, who are fantastic. Women's World Cup, or the women's Final Four coming up. Okay, so we have a great agenda today. We'll start off with quick updates from me, beginning with something that really captures some of the introductions. We're planning an energy transition town hall. And so Ella and Jake and Jimmy and I meet routinely. And at the last meeting, and Jimmy is the graduate student representative for sustainability. And at our last meeting, they came with a great idea to have a town hall. And so we talked about, what is it going to be? Is it going to be sustainability? That's probably too big. Is it going to be climate adaptation? And in the end, we got to the energy transition as a good name. This is something Jonas is very familiar with. He leads the Energy Transition Initiative at the Institute. And it just is a topic that many of us have talked about in different contexts, that the university's work trying to optimize operations at the cogeneration plant and keep a vision for what tomorrow's energy sources might be is an energy transition that's just like North Carolina's and just like a lot of the rest of the world. And we are challenged by the fact, not challenged, but we have to remain operational to keep our billion-dollar research enterprise and the third largest hospital in the state up and going. So we thought this is a great opportunity to bring everyone together. One of our ongoing goals is to try and start these conversations with a shared set of facts and understand, why do we have a cogeneration plant? Why don't we just switch to Duke Power? The kind of questions that everybody tends to ask, and explain the situation that brought us to where we are, own that it's not perfect, as we always do, and then describe the progress we've made and the plans we have to continue to make progress. And so that's what we'd like to do that day. I think it's scheduled to be about an hour and a half in the middle of January 18th. I don't think we settled on an exact time. Originally, I believe we were thinking 12:30, and we maybe possibly because of the room thinking about noon, but we'll get back to the council very quickly with times. And it'll be wonderful if you all could come. I think it's going to be an interesting event. I think it'd be great if you could be there, if you can find time. I think that's probably about it. We're meeting tomorrow to do some final logistical conversation and make sure that we're planning it as well as we can and marketing as soon as we can and getting all the people who might want to know about it information about it. So it's a great idea. I was grateful to Ellen, Jake, and Jimmy for having a great idea. And I think our conversation around what it should look like was a really good example of the kind of collaboration that I hoped would happen when we had great student representation on the council. So that's upcoming. If you're interested in it, please reach out. We're always happy to have more input and thoughts about what might happen there. Really quickly, I'll just talk about the Haynes Partnership, which is what funds the Champion Sustainability Fund, our Champion Revolving Green Fund, and also Champion Sustainability Fund, I think. Yesterday, Melanie and Abigail and I went to Winston-Salem and met with the Haynes folks, and it's just a great meeting. That partnership is growing. I think it's going to be wonderful. Obviously, the revolving green fund is a great thing in and of itself, but they are truly interested. When we first started meeting with them, they seemed really great and really interested. But when you're in the middle of a transaction, sometimes I think it's hard to know whether it's just everyone wants to be nice to get through this process. But they're absolutely great. They're thoughtful, creative, interested, engaged, and I think really interesting things are going to continue to come out of that partnership. So we hope to have more soon on that, but it was a great visit. So that was fun, and it was also heartening for the future. Really quickly, in the area of public outreach, I presented to the Chapel Hill Town Council, and this was probably a little more than a month ago, maybe 2 months even, I don't know. It was, I'll describe it as grueling. So it was a very long presentation a very short presentation with a lot of questions. And it was in the category of things that we're trying to do and sharing information, being very forthright about the challenges, trying to be very clear about the plans and the metrics we're using to assess success, and establishing where that success is going to be shared. There were some questions that I think are fair and are on topic, but there also was, I think it was clear that there's a need for continued communication. We have great connections with the staff, but I think at the political level with the town of Chapel Hill, we'll continue to work and look for ways to be sure that, as I indicated with our hope for the town hall, just that we can all begin with a shared set of facts, that here's where we are, here are the challenges, here's what we're doing. Because it wasn't, I think some people weren't entirely clear what the context in which we're working. Again, the idea that there are simple solutions like turning off the cogen plant. So it was good that we did it. I think it was really productive. There's been a lot of follow-up, but we're continuing to think about how that might go in the future, and things we might be able to do to set it up perhaps in a way that would be, some of my experience there shaped some of our conversation around the town hall, where it's really great to start off with all of us in the same room, hearing the same thing, so that we're level set in terms of here's where we are. So I hope that long night with the council will be of value to planning the town hall. So that was good. We've had Cindy Shea continues to make great progress on Green Office. She did some in-person training, which if I recall correctly, was the first in quite a long time. There, as we've talked about before, that program is being piloted. And Cindy's also become a Green Office, no, forgive me, it's Green Labs. I have my notes wrong. Sorry, Cindy. So a Green Labs ambassador. And please correct me if I'm wrong, Cindy. I want us to convey this right. I'm virtually certain it's Green Labs. So that is great because it is engaging her with a community who are pursuing the same sorts of goals, and allows her to avail herself of the experiences and expertise of other people. So there are two, Green Office and Green Labs, the two that I've mixed up just now, are two really great ways for our community to become directly engaged in moving forward with a lot of the sustainability priorities that we have. So that's very exciting, and expect to hear from Cindy, hopefully with an update on both of those programs at hopefully the next meeting or perhaps the one following. We also have Earth Day plans beginning. It's just around the corner. This is something that anybody who has thoughts on it, please offer them. We have had, I think, some pretty successful events, especially considering we've been constrained by the pandemic. But I think any ideas are welcome. I think the default idea is that we're going to have a big event and talk to lots of people about all the things that matter on Earth Day. But increasingly, I think we've learned from the pandemic, when that wasn't possible, that there are other ways that we can do similar messaging. So if people have ideas, please let us know. Julie, I'm thinking that maybe having Sustainable Carolina have an event on the health side of campus would be great, just because I can't tell you how many emails I get asking if UNC Health falls under Sustainable Carolina. It feels like that could be a way to get the broad, you're doing a great job with the targeted activities around really important issues, but that might be a potential way to get broad awareness in a place where we've never been before, as far as I know.
And I think we could definitely make inroads through Clean Med UNC. So they're a pretty big entity within the School of Medicine. They'd be a good place to start, but we could definitely do something that'd be exciting.
Absolutely. So everyone, please reach out if you have ideas. we are very receptive and we are willing to try lots of different things, and we still have a little bit of time. So those are my introductory remarks. I'd be happy to answer any questions if anyone has any. All right. So hearing none, we will move forward with our agenda. And hopefully everybody has just glanced over it, and you know we had the introductions, we had the chair's report. We're way ahead of schedule, which is awesome. And next, we have a great treat. We have Trey Murphy with us today. And Trey finished up his PhD at UNC in the Department of Geography last year. And he is an ESG and climate risk senior consultant at Forbes, which is a top 10 accounting and advisory firm where he helps his clients leverage socioeconomic data to make impactful sustainability decisions. I wanted to get that part right, and the rest I'm not going to read because I know. So his specialization is at the intersection of energy and law. And I met Trey through Elizabeth Havis, council member, who introduced us at a time when several of us, independently and in small groups, had been having conversations about ESG and about thinking about the university's investments, and the conversations that have gone on recently and in the past around that topic. Last year, we received a handful of letters from different bodies on campus asking questions about ESG, about the university's investments and things that we might be able to do. So by great fortune and Elizabeth introducing us, we were able to speak with Trey and find him at a time when he had defended his dissertation and was transitioning into the working world. And we were able to avail ourselves of his expertise. And to finish off his brief bio with his specialization in energy and law, Trey is also a storm chaser and is also an active member in managing his family's cattle and llama farms, which I guess they're ranches. Forgive me, they're in Texas, Trey. Forgive me, they're not farms, they're ranches, which I think is absolutely delightful. And I also find Trey absolutely delightful. So I'm pleased to introduce him. And Trey's going to talk to us a little bit today with some background on ESG, just again, to get us all to the same place, then to think about universities and what ESG might mean to universities, and a little bit of an environmental scan of what some of our peers are doing in this space and some case studies, and then perhaps just some thoughts for us to think about going forward in how we might proceed with offering ideas for our university. Trey, the longest introduction ever is over. Please take it away.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Mike. That is the longest introduction I've just about ever had, so I really appreciate that. The first step is going to be trying to share my screen. Please let me know if y'all are able to see it. All good? Excellent, excellent. All right, so as Mike had mentioned, I am actually a senior consultant at an accounting firm called Forbes, but I did all of this research that you're about to see today in my past life when I was still a PhD student at the University of North Carolina. So I just wanted to make sure that that distinction was there. Let me go ahead and kind of walk you through what we're going to be talking about today. As Mike mentioned, at a super high level, for the next 10 to 12, 15 minutes, we're going to be talking about what ESG is and its key opportunities and critiques. So for those of you who are already well-versed in ESG and sustainability in an investment context, please feel free to minimize the Zoom and turn on Minesweeper, play it for a little while, and then check back in about 10 minutes. After that, I'm going to be giving you a little bit of an introduction into how our peer universities are incorporating ESG policies into their investment decisions. And then I'm going to wrap things up with a kind of a brief contextualization of the current state of UNC investments alongside ESG policies and procedures. So let's go ahead and start with the elephant in the room. What the heck is ESG? So for quite a few of you, you've probably heard about ESG. Maybe you've heard about it in a derogatory sense as being like something that politicians are talking about with a negative connotation. I'm here to kind of level set everyone and get everyone on the same page in terms of what ESG is, what its history is, and what we see as sort of the common opportunities and critiques surrounding ESG. So at a high level, what is ESG? Well, ESG is actually an acronym. It stands for Environment, Social, Governance. And you can see those buckets up here on the screen. Now, these buckets are important because what they do is they help describe anything that is not on a company's balance sheet. So when we think of a company's balance sheet, we think of income and expenses, revenues, things like that. ESG is all the metrics that don't appear on a company's balance sheet. And so, but these metrics are still really important for making investment decisions. And so companies voluntarily or through regulatory requirements disclose these ESG metrics. Example ESG metrics could be your electricity consumption over the past year, your greenhouse gas emissions, whether a company treats its employees with respect and gives them good cost of living adjustment wages, things like that. As well as a key pillar is governance, right? Is the board of directors engaged with the company? Are they meeting regularly? Are they independent or are they kind of beholden to someone else? And as part of this, you can begin to imagine that these elements collectively help an investor make a decision as to whether they are going to invest into a company or not, right? Because these elements really begin to describe whether a company is the culture of a company, the risk tolerance of a company, the types of characteristics that it's operating in, whether it's doing well compared to its peers or not in terms of retaining talent or in terms of mitigating the effects of climate change. So at a high level, that's what ESG is. Let's talk a little bit, though, about sort of the history of ESG. So as you can see up here on the screen, I actually have, and one of my colleagues at Forbes put this together, a brief history of kind of the recent history of ESG. And I'm going to get to that in just a second, but I'd like to talk about the deeper history of ESG and sustainable investment. So the actual history of ESG and sustainable investment, according to legal scholars as well as historians, actually stretches back several centuries to before the American Revolution. During that time, Quakers generally had a fair amount of pooled investment income that they could use to put towards businesses and opportunities. And Quakers in general would seek out investments that did not use human slavery, therefore making a decision about their investment not based on the bottom line of a financial report, but instead based on the specific characteristics of the type of investments that they were looking into. So scholars generally say that that is at least sort of the start of sustainable investing in the United States. If we fast forward a little bit to the 1960s, 70s, there was also increased interest in in what's commonly referred to as socially responsible investing, which is similar to ESG. I'll talk about the differences here in a minute. So in the 1960s and 70s, there were a lot of individuals who were becoming aware of social, we'll call it dilemmas, right? Do they want to invest in a company that makes cigarettes, even though cigarettes cause public health issues, right? Do they want to invest in a company that makes bullets for the Vietnam War, even though that specific person may not want to further the Vietnam War? And so around the 60s and 70s is when we begin to see individual investors making decisions that sort of prioritize what I'd like to refer to as values over value, right? Their ethical values over the value of a particular investment. We see this carried forward in the 1980s when universities and companies across the United States tried to divest from South African apartheid movement related investments. And even more recently in the late aughts, whenever a lot of investors were divesting from Sudan and the Darfur genocide situation. I'll be returning back to those in a minute, but I kind of want to return back to this timeline that I have up here on the screen. So when we think about the way that investors make decisions around ESG and around sustainable investment, we begin to see the emergence of an ecosystem of frameworks that companies rely on in order to make their investment decisions. So the first framework was the Global Reporting Initiative. Other frameworks that followed were SASB, UN SDGs, TCFD, and a whole bunch of other kind of alphabet soup-like frameworks that have emerged over time. These frameworks tend to be voluntary, right? And these frameworks tend to be ways in which companies go about disclosing that type of data that investors are looking for. I'll be delving into these metrics a little bit more, these frameworks here in a little bit, but I kind of want to highlight something that's not even on this timeline. That is, in 2004 is when we actually see the emergence of ESG as a term. So when you hear critiques about ESG being a totally new phenomenon, in reality, it has a much longer history dating back centuries. But what happened in 2004? Well, in 2004, a United Nations report offered that companies and assets, quote, that perform better with regard to environment, social, and governance metrics can increase shareholder value by, for example, properly managing risks, anticipating regulatory action, accessing new markets, while at the same time contributing to the sustainable development of the societies in which they operate, close quote. So that inflection point in 2004, with the coining of the term ESG, it really began to really take hold in the late aughts and the early 2010s, when ESG sort of became mainstream in the investment communities. And then probably within the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen ESG sort of enter into the normal lexicon of investment decisions all across the United States and around the world. All right, so let's talk about the primary types of consumers of ESG data. The first of which is regulators, right? Regulators want companies to produce reports, to produce elements that aren't on their balance sheet. And you can think about this in the context of oil and gas companies and their requirement to produce a report to the EPA that discloses their greenhouse gas emissions, right? Or you could talk about how a company has to disclose its labor practices to OSHA, right? So these are the types of ESG policies that we see emerge from a regulatory context. Customers and clients are also interested in ESG data because they want to understand the sustainability of the products and services that they are purchasing. Employees are increasingly turning to ESG data and monitoring how their companies are doing as compared to other companies, trying to make sure that the companies are being prepared for climate change, being prepared and taking care of their employees, giving them decent health insurance. The general public is also interested in ESG, right? And this is in the context of both corporate social responsibility as well as corporate citizenship. You may think more highly of a company, even if you've never bought a product from them, if they have a good sustainability track record. Banks and loan officers are especially attuned to ESG data because they look at that data and then they begin to assess whether a company is a particular risk or not, a financial risk or not. And so you can think about, for example, if a bank is about to give a 30-year loan to a company and that company has zero preparation for climate change, then that bank is unlikely to give that loan, or at least would give it at a higher percentage rate. And then, of course, the one that I've been talking about most of all is investment managers and analysts. These are, they of course review the ESG potential and risks of assets to see what their long-term performance is going to be. All right, so how is ESG data kind of broadcasted to the broader world? Well, it sort of falls into two different buckets, right? One bucket is voluntary reporting. And so what you find nowadays is that about 90% of the companies reporting on the Dow Jones Industrials or the S&P 500 are producing what are referred to as sustainability reports. And for you data scientists out there, this is a trove of data that I think academics could really get involved in and really begin to understand a little bit more and create some fun research papers from. But that's neither here nor there. These companies are producing sustainability reports that disclose all of the ESG activities and sustainability linked activities that they've been doing over the prior year. A lot of these companies also have sustainability websites. They also respond to surveys from potential investors. They are also being tracked and measured by companies that rank companies based on their ESG performance. So if you are doing well compared to your peers, then you would have a higher ranking compared to another company that isn't, for example, examining or involved in ESG. In many of these contexts, you see that companies are relying on these voluntary reporting frameworks that I was talking about early on: GRI, SASB, TCFD, IIRC, and others. On the other side, there is a secondary bucket of ESG reporting, right? And this is reporting that's required by either the local, state, or national government. We can think about this in the context of EPA greenhouse gas reporting. Recently, the Security and Exchange Commission, SEC, has said that they're going to start requiring all publicly traded companies to disclose at least scope 1 and 2 emissions, and potentially even scope 3 emissions. And we also see that there are a lot of regulations at the state level. You can imagine that I have a couple of California clients, for example, at present, and they are responding almost on a monthly basis to requests for information from California regulators. And so in this context, right, these companies are relying on guidance from the regulatory agency to determine what they need to produce and what format it needs to come in. All right, so that's ESG at a high level. For those of you who are even sort of peripherally engaged in the political conversations that are occurring across the United States, many of you already know that ESG is somewhat a controversial topic right now and has become almost a bad word in some circles of American politics. So I kind of like to talk a little bit about some of the key criticisms, what I see as the 3 key criticisms of ESG and my response. And obviously this isn't comprehensive. This isn't tracking all of the criticisms of ESG, but I just kind of wanted to get everyone on the same page. So one of the key criticisms of ESG is that ESG is the same thing as socially responsible investing. This is incorrect. Socially responsible investing is akin to that type of investing I was referring to back in the 70s and 80s, when individuals were making decisions on not to invest in a cigarette company because it produces cigarettes, right? Instead, what ESG does is it flips the values over value on its head and says, what our key and primary focus is going to be is on financial performance, and we are looking at a company's values, its culture, its ethics, it's the way it treats its employees, et cetera, as a way to factor in the valuation of that specific asset. Another criticism that I see pretty frequently nowadays is that ESG is, quote, woke capitalism. And when I first started seeing that, I had to ask my 12-year-old niece what woke meant first. And then once I had kind of heard and realized what woke was, I was able to give a kind of a decent response to it. And the idea that ESG is woke capitalism, you know, that ESG is a flash in the pan, it's something that's meant to be responsive, it's something that's is kind of aligned to a single agenda. That is false. In reality, ESG has, like I said, over a 200-year history. And what ESG does is it highlights assets that have lower long-term risks. So for example, if a company is preparing for climate change, then odds are it's probably a good idea to invest in that company and to support that company, because odds are it's going to be better and more well-equipped to fight off climate change moving forward, right? Fight off the negative ramifications of climate change. What ESG does not do is it does not encourage divestment, right? And we see this a lot with my clients, is that a lot of my clients are interested in, for example, continuing to invest in the oil and gas industry. What they're doing in the oil and gas industry, though, is they're going in and they're picking those companies that have a just transition target set up, that have a business model that allows for modifications to move away from the oil and gas industry and instead into more sustainable energy industries. So I just want to make that distinction that ESG does not encourage divestment. What it encourages, though, is a closer view at the investments that you have and trying to understand whether those assets are going to perform well in the long run. Finally, there's been a lot of criticism recently that ESG-oriented investments have worse returns than comparable to non-ESG investments. In reality, we see that across the two meta studies that I have up there on the screen, which collectively encapsulate approximately 3,000 studies, we find that ESG performance is basically on par or slightly above average than the stock performance, than the Dow Jones performance in the long term. There, of course, are going to be ESG assets that are not going to perform well. And you can see that back in 2015, that meta study identified 8% of the studies finding low performers, 14% here in a more recent study. But as you can see, the vast majority, 70 to 90%, really fall into this either equal to or better than performance in the long run. All right, so hopefully those of you who are playing Minesweeper, feel free to go ahead and minimize that button and hop back into this conversation. So what I'm going to be doing for the rest of today's discussion is talking about ESG in the context of university investigation. Oh, I do see that there is a hand already raised. Julie, do you want to go ahead and ask?
Hi, this is Julie. Yeah, I'm just a little curious. I want to sort of validate. So back in the 80s, I read the book Rating America's Corporate Conscience. And then, of course, all of my retirement accounts are in social responsibility funds and like Pax World funds and things like that. So you're saying that basically this is a little different approach to what I've been doing, that it doesn't necessarily divest from the companies that I feel are producing the products I don't agree with, but instead looking at more long-term sustainability strategies. Is that right?
Yes, you hit the nail on the head. So what ESG does is it prioritizes, or it encourages the investor to look at the data and to say, okay, is this company prepared not only for climate change, is it also prepared for social unrest? Is it prepared for greater scrutiny from regulators? Is this company prepared to respond and be nimble in situations where that might be needed? So you've hit the nail on the head. That is the key distinction.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, of course. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at ESG and in the context of universities, right? How university endowments are beginning to incorporate ESG into their decision making. So universities endowments, as you can imagine, are sort of seen as long-term financial assets, right? These are assets that you want to last for a really, really long time, centuries even. And so we can see that there's sort of a natural aligning between ESG, which looks at long-term risks and tries to either quantify or qualify what those long-term risks are, and identify assets that are performing better against those long-term risks relative to a university that is also looking at the long term in terms of its investment strategies. So what we see is that university administrators are increasingly looking to ESG as a way to kind of structure the endowment. Not only that, we see that there's also been kind of a groundswell of interest from students, professors, donors, and even the broader public in encouraging universities to look at ESG as a way to make sure that the financial footing of the university is strong in the long term. This is not to state that ESG is without its risks, though. And university administrators would, have frequently noted that ESG sort of has some uncertainty around what constitutes success, right? At this point, our benchmark of success is comparing peer companies against each other and trying to figure out which one has the better metrics or the better characteristics. There's also been a lot of talk recently around greenwashing to generate investment. And so in that context, we see a company producing sustainability data that may not be backed by truth. I am seeing a lot of companies push back against this, though. They're hiring auditors left, right, and center to go in and audit their own ESG data and to try to put financial style controls around that data to make sure it's not modified and to make sure that it's comprehensive too. I think we're early in this process, but as additional regulations come in from national, state, and local governments, companies will be required to put more and more controls around that data to counteract greenwashing. University administrators also note that ESG has better than average gains are expected, but not always assured. And so sometimes there's like a comfort level in keeping with what you got, as opposed to switching to a new sort of policy and set of procedures around your investment decisions. So, this past, I guess it was in the spring semester, I worked with Mike and Elizabeth, and we ended up examining actually more than 18 universities, although we kind of pared it down to 18 peer university endowments, tried to examine what their policies and procedures were. Then after that, we did a few case studies. And then, like I say, I'll talk a little bit about the history of ESG here at UNC. So let's talk for a second about the peer university assessment. So what is a peer university? Well, in the context of this investigation, a peer university is a top 100 US News and World Report public university located in the US South or Midwest. Why did we not choose the West Coast? Because the West Coast culturally operates a little bit differently than North Carolina does. And the same thing could be said for New England as well. So that's why we have a relatively small sample size. That's why we kind of focus on the universities that are in the regions surrounding UNC. What we see, though, is actually pretty surprising. I see that we actually have another question. Go ahead, Ella.
Hi. Yeah, I'm just curious what you mean when you say that culturally it's a little bit different. Like what culturally is considered different between those peer universities?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when we think about, for example, the governance context, governing basically UNC, right? There's a different set of expectations around what a university can and should do in North Carolina than compared to California or Washington. So amongst many of our California, I'll call them peer institutions, they're already working towards divestment. There's been a big push by the state government to divest away from oil and gas and coal assets, hydrocarbon assets. We don't see that same sort of push here in North Carolina. And so as a result, we kind of wanted to exclude those from the context of this presentation, although I did end up collecting a little bit of data on that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Of course. So what we see is that amongst our peer universities, and again, these are the ones that are, geographically sort of near to North Carolina, approximately 44% of the university endowments have included either an ESG or a sustainability investment policy. They kind of call it different things, but collectively, it's a pretty interesting finding. And this includes universities such as the University of Florida, our colleagues down the road at North Carolina State, UGA, Wisconsin, and UVA. And amongst these universities, they've all taken a slightly different approach to incorporating ESG into their investment portfolios. Some of these universities have kind of a rote policy that they abide by. Other universities kind of quietly submit something and say that it doesn't exist, but it does exist. And I can give you an example of that later on. It was kind of interesting to see that. But the one that I'm going to be focusing on here in a minute is going to be UVA, and we'll use that as our case study for the context of today's discussion. So not only do we see this ESG kind of taking hold amongst our peer universities, nationally, we see that approximately 29% of universities have incorporated endowment, 29% of university endowments have incorporated ESG into their endowment decisions. And that came from this study here from AGB and SEI. And we see that another 5% were intending to incorporate ESG into their policy decisions during fiscal year 22. I haven't followed up on that, but I assume it's probably actually a little bit of an understatement given the currents that I've seen going on more recently. Okay, let's talk for a little bit about the UVA case, because if we look at our peer universities, geographically speaking, UVA sort of offers the most robust and the most comprehensive kind of case to switch away from an investments as usual approach towards a more ESG policy approach. What we see is that approximately 2.5 years ago, the University of Virginia Investment Management Company, the UVMCO, started to receive a little bit of interest from donors and professors, students. There was an especially vocal group called Wahoos for Sustainability that got involved and tried to understand, okay, what are the ways that we could begin to incorporate ESG into investment decisions? The group was staffed in 2021, and then in 2022, actually just a few months ago, they released their investor responsibility report. And it's a fascinating report. It details what the current state of their investments are. It details the policies and procedures surrounding any future investments. And it also sets out a set of targets that the university endowment officials would like to achieve by 2050. And you can see this is a timeline from the 2022 investor responsibility report. You can see, the goal is to produce probably yearly reports moving forward. And then by 2050, try to get to a low carbon footprint or even carbon neutral footprint for all of the university's investments. So this provides kind of an interesting pathway to consider for universities that are interested in pursuing ESG policies. It was very deliberate. It was very stakeholder rich. It was very, it allowed for a lot of response and, question and response. So what do we see in terms of ESG in the context of the University of North Carolina? The Chapel Hill Investment Fund, CHIF, as far as I know, does not have a defined ESG policy, although feel free to correct me if it actually does. What we see, though, is that the university university endowment staff has actually put together a couple of socially responsible investment decisions in the past. So in 1987, the university divested from all South African apartheid-linked assets. In 2008, the university did not have any investments linked to the genocide in Darfur, but they committed to not putting any assets into companies that were associated with that genocide. And in 2020, a SHE sustainability or STARS report, UNC said that there is approximately 0.33% of the endowment that is set aside to target sustainable industries. And that emerged from an investment decision that was made back in 2014. So as compared to our peers, this is a relatively small investment, especially in the context of recent interest in ESG and sustainable investment more broadly. All right, so I think I've talked long enough at this point. I'm going to wrap up with a few conclusions. The first of which is that ESG policies and procedures really do represent a clear way to reduce long-term investment risks for investors. And we see that ESG-oriented investments really do encourage both positive financial and sustainable outcomes, right? This value over values paradigm that I was talking about earlier. Interest in ESG at the university level is likely to continue rising both from internal stakeholders, think about students, staff, and then external stakeholders. And the biggest one that comes to mind is, of course, donors, right? And then finally, we're starting to see a really broad acceptance of ESG at peer university endowments, both locally as well as across the nation. And so I'd like to take a moment to give my gratitude to Mike and Elizabeth. And I also want to encourage y'all to reach out to me if y'all have any questions after this presentation. You can reach me at my Forvis email address or, happy to chat on LinkedIn too. So thank y'all for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Trey. Everybody's clapping.
Yes, and I've got one more question for you, Trey. So is there a way that universities can kind of combine that value over values with the social responsibility fund? So are there any people who work in the investment world that kind of try to combine those two concepts into one?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Julie. And what we see typically is that if someone is really interested in having both ESG as well as SRI, there typically tends to be a little bit of a firewall. And so the asset manager would go in and select a series of assets that would conform to the ESG side of things, and then a set of assets that would conform to the SRI value over values approach.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, of course. Jimmy?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. So in student government, we're actually working on a campaign to kind of argue for more ESG friendly investment in the endowment. So this comes very timely. If you could share with me the research that you did, I think that would be really helpful. I would love to cite that in the campaign that we're working on.
Sure, let's I'll coordinate with Mike and Elizabeth on sort of what the best output would be to kind of share with the broader community. It may be this presentation and I add in some references, or it could be the report that I put together. So we'll talk more internally about that and sort of figure out what the best output would be.
Yeah, that would be great. And then the second question would be, what do you think is the best way to get this information and these arguments to the people who make the decisions on investment at Carolina? If you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I do. So in terms of effective ESG, like stakeholders that were able to affect change at other universities, the biggest investor group in affecting change is going to be your donors, right? And that's what we saw going on at many of the other peer universities, is that once donors got involved and really started pushing for ESG investment, that's really began to move the needle in terms of positive ESG investment. And of course, it's not just donors, you know, professors, students, staff, the lay public, right? I think we all sort of know the various ways to kind of pressure university administrators into doing things when needed. But the one that always had the greatest traction was donors, or if the state government stepped in and required a university to kind of go down the path of ESG or sustainable investing. So great questions. Anything else?
I'm looking for hands. If anybody doesn't have their hand up and would like to unmute, please do. All right, not seeing anything else. So I think Trey has indicated this is an ongoing conversation, and we look forward to interacting more with this group and with Trey. It's the beginning of thinking about how we might move forward. Obviously, there'll be lots of different parties interested in this, and hopefully we can all just come up with the best information and make smart decisions. All right. Well, Trey, thank you very much. Elizabeth, thank you very much. Thank you all for the great questions, and we'll definitely continue the conversation.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure to be here with you today.
We all need to come visit your llama ranch. I don't even know what that looks like. How do you keep
Open
them
invitation anytime. Y'all
Where
are
is
all
it?
welcome. Excuse me?
In Texas?
Yes, my outside of Fort Worth.
Oh, okay. I ran a race at a wine and llama place outside of Winston-Salem about 6 weeks ago. It was very cool. So, yeah. They're
Who
fun
won?
to
Did the llamas win?
No, they did not. But yeah, they're so much fun. So it'd be great to see it.
Yeah, always happy to show people around my llama ranch. All of y'all are welcome at any time in Fort Worth.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much again, Trey. All right. So next up on our action-packed agenda, we have an update on our greenhouse gas inventory. I think everyone knows that we have a really excellent greenhouse gas inventory that allows us to understand our problems and think about solutions and realistically model what might happen with specific interventions and say realistic things about how do we get where we want to go. And the person who does all of that is Melanie Elliott. And Melanie is going to provide you an overview of our greenhouse gas report, which if you go to sustainable.unc.edu is in the reports tab with many other very informative pieces of information. But Melanie, I would ask you to please take it away.
Thanks, Mike. All right, let me get screen sharing. Okay, can you see the slides in presentation mode? Great, okay. So, yep, I think I've met most of you and honestly kind of gone through this presentation before we did this last year. So some of this will be redundant information, but I think most of it bears repeating because it's a bit complex at times. But yeah, I mean, you know, it's going to be an update on the 2021 greenhouse gas inventory. So a few differences compared to last year. So first, I'll just show you kind of the high level, and we'll come back around to this. I'm going to break down each category a little more for you. But here's just the emission trends since we've started taking a greenhouse gas inventory in 2007. And obviously the last couple of years are really low compared to the previous years. And we know some of that is due to the pandemic, but some of that is due to intentional efforts from the university to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So just kind of breaking down the past year. And as a reminder, all of this is done on a calendar year basis, whereas a lot of things that we do at the university are the fiscal year, which is July to June, but we do this on a calendar year. So the calendar year 2021 breakdown looks mostly normal in the categories. Combustion is typically around 50% or so, a little higher, came out to about 59% this year. And purchased electricity, our scope 2 emissions, about 23%, which is relatively normal. Again, about 23 to 25% on normal years. But where things start to get a little wonky due to the pandemic are air travel and commuting, and then our other emissions, which I'll break down for you again later, are a little bit higher, and that's just, these are just percentages, right? So we're looking at still low emissions, but the percentages have shifted a bit over the last couple of years. So as Mike mentioned, we're going to have this energy transition town hall in a few weeks, and we're going to talk about cogeneration a lot, but I'm going to drive home some of those points for you again today. So our combustion emissions made up about 59% of our emissions for 2021, right? And I think this is the point that a lot of people tend to miss as we're thinking about combustion emissions, is that our combustion services are primarily steam. So combustion generates electricity and steam, but we can really think of electricity as the byproduct, right, of combustion at cogeneration, because our primary service is steam. And then we produce electricity with the waste heat, and then we have to supplement that electricity with purchases from Duke Energy. So we'll look more at our electricity purchases in a moment, but I just kind of wanted to drive home that point for you. And I also put some steam use graphs up for you, just from the last few years. You can see that trend. And also we produce the steam that's used on campus, and that includes the steam that goes to the hospital. And the reason we include those steam emissions in our emissions inventory is because we control the steam production. So the hospital steam use also impacts our emissions. And you can see in this graph that hospital steam use was up compared to the last few years because of the pandemic, right? And so campus steam use was down, as to be expected. But I always try to remind people that steam is primarily used for heating buildings. It has other uses like sterilization and things like that, hot water production, but it's primarily used for heating buildings. And so we still have to maintain a certain temperature in the buildings, even if they're unoccupied. So we're always going to be using steam. And I say all of that to say that, the contributions to combustion emissions include steam use and steam distribution losses, which we learned at our last meeting that there was some efficiency upgrades to the steam distribution system. So we have some emissions reductions there, as well as fuel use, right? So our emissions from combustion are due to the fuels that we use for combustion, but also the amount of steam that we use. So switching up the fuel mix will help, as well as steam efficiency and just reduced steam consumption on campus. So looking at combustion trends specifically over time, as I just mentioned, the things that go into the combustion emissions, they all have different contributions. Combustion emissions are down 26% when we compare 2021 to 2007. And one large driving factor of that is that coal use is down 54% compared to 2007. So we are switching up that fuel mix so that we are reducing emissions. So carrying on that conversation of cogeneration, last year cogeneration produced about 16% of our electricity. So we had to supplement our electricity purchases or our electricity use from purchases from Duke Energy. And this is a chart of their fuel mix that I get from our account manager annually, as well as their emission factor. And so you can see that Duke Energy has, a relatively clean, if you will, grid. So more than 50% of their grid is fueled by carbon neutral sources. So it's that one major contributing factor to our electricity purchases, and their emission factor actually goes down almost every year. So last year, over the last couple of years, it's been a little flat, but when we're looking at the trend since 2007, their emission factor is going down annually. And so that's one contributing factor to our reduced purchased electricity emissions. But of course, energy efficiency contributing to lowered electricity consumption. And then the other thing that impacts that is the amount of electricity that we're producing, right? So if we're producing 16% at cogeneration, that's, we need 84%, but if we, in some cases, we can produce more of that percentage, then that's less purchased electricity that we need. So there's quite a few factors that go into purchased electricity emissions as well. So looking at that trend since 2007, of course, that's gone down, largely due to that emission factor, right? So when you look at my little call out box, our emissions are down 49%, but our electricity use is only down 9%. So that means that the largest contributing factor to our emissions reductions is Duke Energy's emission factor. So that's really important to keep in mind. Of course, energy efficiency is important, and reducing electricity consumption is important, but the major contributing factor is Duke Energy's emission factor. So the smallest category this year is air travel, and this is largely due to the pandemic, right? Or I would say 100% due to the pandemic. So there were a lot of travel restrictions and things like that. And so just to remind everyone, air travel is often necessary for research, conferences, athletics, and study abroad, right? And so during the pandemic, we saw a pause in study abroad programs. And a lot of people weren't traveling as much for research and conferences. We had these virtual conferences where we didn't have to travel as much. And the emissions are based on the miles flown or the dollar spent. So this is a pretty easy calculation, right? There's not all of these different contributing factors to those emissions specifically. It's simply how far did we fly? But as I said, of course, this was greatly impacted by the pandemic. So we expect this to bounce back. So looking at the trends since 2007, I didn't update the call out box just because the emissions were so low that it didn't necessarily seem appropriate to adjust these numbers, but again, it just drives home the point that the emission factor is really important here. So as airlines are becoming more efficient, or they're using more biofuels, or they're bringing online electric planes soon, their emission factor is lowering as well. And so, of course, we want to use air travel only when it's necessary, but it is necessary for a lot of things like study abroad programs and research and conferences. But as we kind of shift to this new normal after the pandemic, where, you know, we've got great technologies for virtual conferences, and maybe we don't have to fly as much, as well as the airline emission factors decreasing, our emissions are going to continue to go down. So we expect to bounce back in 2022. It's definitely not going to stay this low, but we don't predict that it'll go much higher than it has been in the past. For commuting, so those emissions are calculated for all campus users, students, faculty, and staff, and they're based on a commuter survey, which some of you may have gotten recently, and the campus population. So it's been a little tricky over the last couple of years to calculate those emissions, just because, you know, what we used to do is just say, okay, we have this many employees, and we have this many part-time students and this many full-time students. But it was really hard to accurately understand how often people were traveling to campus. So for 2021, we used work from home data that came from Human Resources, which seemed fairly accurate, but it was a prediction. So we're not even sure how well that actually played out over the year. But certainly for 2022, the data is going to be much more accurate. So we're going to have a lot less uncertainty for a few reasons. So one is that we'll have a new commuter survey. So the commuter survey is distributed biannually on odd years. So we haven't actually had one with updated results since 2019 because of the pandemic. So the most recent one is being distributed now. So please fill it out if you have it, because that really helps me out. And I've been working with transportation and parking to update the questions on the commuter survey so that I can get better results. So one question we'll be asking about is how often, like the frequency or the percentage of your time that you're spending doing telework instead of commuting to campus. And there should also be a question about vehicle type. So in the past, if you said that you drive alone to campus, I don't know what kind of car you're driving, so I can't apply an accurate emission factor, because you could be driving an EV or you could be driving a pickup truck. I don't know what your actual emissions are from that travel. So we just kind of use an average emission factor for that vehicle. And so with this new question, this should really help give us more precise and more accurate results for our commuting emissions, which I think is going to show a reduction in commuting emissions. Excuse me. So our commuting emissions, of course, have been down during the pandemic as, you know, students were working remotely, faculty and staff were working remotely. And so that trend is down 32% since 2007. And of course, we anticipate a large amount of that going back to normal levels. But as a lot of us are continuing to work from home, it's not going to bounce back fully. But in general, the emissions were trending up just as campus population grew and we had more commuters coming to campus. So the other category is just kind of a catch-all for everything else that we haven't captured so far. Typically, each of these categories listed here represents less than 2% of our total emissions each. So that includes fleet, ground travel. So that's, you know, if the university is paying for you to drive somewhere, maybe drive to a conference or something like that. Our food purchases, our paper purchases, our waste and refrigerants and chemicals. Upstream natural gas is a way for us to account for the emissions that come from natural gas production. So this upstream natural gas versus the natural gas that we use on campus for combustion. So it's a small amount. And then transmission and distribution losses are from purchased electricity. So that's accounting for the inefficiencies of the grid. So those have been trending down over the last more than a decade as well, and they're down 39%, although they are back up a little bit. And this is largely driven by upstream natural gas emissions. Because we have been displacing coal with natural gas, we're seeing an increase in our upstream natural gas emissions, which is what we would expect when we're using more natural gas. So just to bring it all back together, this is the first slide that I showed you that has all of the years and all of those breakdowns. You know, the emissions are down 40% overall since 2007. So that's roughly the same as it was last year. But this is a little more driven by a reduction in air travel this past year. So again, we do expect these emissions to bounce back a little bit. So one other thing I wanted to let you all know is that this semester I had an eco studio intern, and she and I were working on like disentangling the impacts of the pandemic and the impacts of our actual efforts. And one thing that we wanted to do with that was to be able to recreate this graph that's in the climate action plan, because this was created in 2019. And you see this business as usual line that is, you know, strictly increasing from, 2019. Well, we know that the pandemic greatly impacted what that looks like. And so we spent the last semester trying to figure out, okay, what % of this decrease that we've experienced is from the pandemic? What % of this decrease is from our efforts? And then what % of the pandemic impacts are going to bounce back and which % are not going to bounce back? What % is that new normal where we're, working from home? And so what business as usual represents is if we did nothing, if we didn't have, a climate action plan, if we didn't have any efforts ongoing to reduce our emissions and we just grew campus every year and increased our emissions. And so this is a little preliminary. I just wanted to have this because there were Eco Studio presentations today. So I wanted to kind of have a first version of this being recreated. So this will not go into the climate action plan as is, but so this is kind of what it looks like now, where you see this huge drop. And then what we did was, kind of predict this new starting point, what 2022 is going to end up looking like, that bounce back. So that's where you see this point for 2022 where it's bounced back, and then that new business as usual, which is a lot lower. And so what I need to continue to work on is these emission strategies and how they're going to reduce our emissions over time. But yeah, so that's all I have for you today. Any questions? I didn't see any hands raised or anything. So the commuter survey that comes from transportation and parking, and I don't have access to that, but I can see if we can get it distributed to you all. But I believe that it goes to a certain subset of people, and then it's like, I think maybe 4,000 people in the past. So I don't know if I can get that, but I can ask.
Other questions? Clapping. Elizabeth, thank you. Anyone else? Am I missing any hands? All right. Thank you, Melanie. That was great. And as always,
Sorry, I had one question. Do you know when you get the 2022 data on like travel emissions and everything? I'm just so curious to see what's going to happen. I feel like it's going to be way higher than before because everyone's like frantically going all at once.
Yes. So the short answer is no, I do not. But based on last year's timeline, so I get a lot of data right away in January. But the bigger categories I really don't get until later in the year. So that's why I'm presenting this to you now, because we really just got all of the 2021 data. So with especially air travel, the new system that everyone loves so dearly. Caused some
But it can give us
complications.
great data. Concur will be great for data.
It will be great data. It will be the best data. So that in the past, I've gotten like multiple spreadsheets that I've had to deal with. And so now that everything that, we're not doing reimbursements anymore, all of the travel data is going through this single stream. I will hopefully get a single data set to look at. But there was a lot of complication this past year because we transitioned to that system in the middle of that year. And so it took a long time it was maybe August when I got that travel data. And that was a big challenge. So hopefully before August, but it may not be just because, it's still a system that people are learning. And I won't get the rest of the data. It's typically around August, but when people are short-staffed and, busy and things like that, it's harder to get the data because it's not always people's top priority to report to me. But yeah, and we typically don't put the whole report together until we have everything. But if you're specifically interested in travel data, I can get that to you as soon as I have it, but I don't know when that will be.
I'm just curious. And then you get separate data for like the study abroad, travel, and grad students, right? Because they don't have to use Concur because they don't have T&E cards, maybe, I don't know.
I believe they still have to use Concur, but this past year was just wonky because I had so many data sets. So I don't know what it's going to look like this year, but yeah, so study abroad will, I believe, still be separate. Yeah. But hopefully everything else will go through Concur, but I'm not even 100% certain on that. So, but at least we're coming to the end of the calendar year. So if we haven't experienced any major hiccups this calendar year, then should be good for next year.
Always good to know there's something good about Concur. All right, anyone else? Melanie, thank you. That was excellent. All right, and like with all topics, feel free to reach out. And I think when I hyped up our emissions inventory, you now know that I wasn't exaggerating. It is great and super useful, and Melanie does a great job. All right, so next up, we have Abigail Brewer going to talk to us a bit about updates to our strategic framework. Abigail.
Yes, hello. Not quite as exciting as Melanie's excellent data, but
totally exciting. It's strategy.
All right. All right, can everybody see my screen? All right. So UNC Institute for the Environment is in the process of updating their strategic plan. So as part of this process, I worked on expanding Sustainable Carolina's strategic framework, which when it was created earlier this year, it was kind of bare bones and minimal, which was the idea of that strategic framework. But to make it more cohesive with the other centers and entities within the Institute for the Environment, I kind of expanded upon it, adding in initiatives and objectives, as well as strategic opportunities. And then at the end of this presentation, you'll be able to see how our initiatives align with the Carolina Next Innovations for Public Good framework. All right. So our strategic initiative 1 is leading sustainability and innovation at Carolina. So our first initiative is at the university level, and this first objective that you see is collaborating, engaging, and communicating with students, faculty, staff, and the surrounding community. We've completed 2 of the plans outlined in the Chancellor's Sustainability Roadmap, the climate action plan and the water plan. And then hopefully in the next year, we'll be able to have data that we can use to complete the waste plan. And then once those 3 plans are complete, they'll be updated as needed, as new developments arise and as we implement new actions. But then in addition to updating those, we hope to have a series of emerging issues plans that cover things like environmental justice and food waste and security and that sort of thing. And then our second objective is all about data. How can we obtain the data that we need? How can we analyze it and share it, not just with our campus, but with universities across the nation? So every 3 to 5 years, our team takes part of a formalized reporting through HG STARS, and that includes operations data, but also data on curriculum, engagement, academics, innovation, and more. And so we also update our emissions data in the Sustainability Indicator Management and Analysis platform annually. Melanie is in charge of that, and she does a great job. And so this ensures transparency and that we're maintaining our commitments with Second Nature and Race to Zero. Our second strategic initiative is facilitating transformative action. And then the first objective under here is providing programmatic support. This involves programs like Carolina Green Office and Green Labs, which Mike mentioned earlier, that Cindy heads up those 2 programs. And it also includes email communication with individuals who come to us with questions. We're able to direct those individuals to the right point of contact, whether it's on our team or outside of our team. Which is one of the really great parts of having the Sustainability Council. We have a lot of different perspectives there. And then our second objective under this initiative is providing resources needed for campus improvements. And so, we're an old university, we're centuries old, so we have some challenges when it comes to implementing new sustainability strategies. So through things like the Champion Sustainability Fund, as well as capital projects, which Mike and Cindy are both heavily involved in, we're able to supply the resources and the time needed to improve campus. All right, and our final initiative is Strategic Initiative 3, Nurturing Educational Efforts. This is very much on the individual level, and it helps students, direct them in their studies, but also their everyday life and, how they can incorporate sustainability in both of those aspects. Mike especially connects students with researchers in their area of interest. Melanie created a database of sustainability related courses, which was really well received by students. And that is across academic disciplines and in different schools and departments. So I think there's somewhere like 280 courses listed in that. Is that correct? Somewhere around there. So it's a really great resource. And then Cindy leads sustainability tours for classes, which we just did one recently for a Principles of Sustainability class. So leading them around different spots on campus, which is a really great opportunity because things like cisterns you can't see, but they're there. So it's helpful when, you have somebody who knows where they are and can talk about, what they do and everything like that. And then lastly, of course, we have the Sustainable Triangle Field Site, which is being co-directed by Mike Peeler and Tony Sebastian. So that's also a great resource. All right, so we're going to end on this slide, the alignment with Carolina Next. So you'll see on the left-hand side, there's the 3 strategic initiatives. And then on the right, there are the different Carolina Next strategic initiatives. And we can expand on these if you would like to, but basically there's 8 initiatives here. And we, through these 3 different initiatives that we have, we kind of fit into all but 2 of them. And I do think that we're set up in coming years to expand and include the other 2, which are globalizing and promoting democracy. I think there's definitely room to grow there. But just for your knowledge, here's it all laid out. So yeah, that's all I have. If you have any questions, we can go into a discussion.
Thanks, Abigail. That was great. And I'll just say this was a short timeline activity, and we're going to distribute these slides to you all. And please, any input is more than welcome. We definitely want to have all the perspectives from the council. So are any questions for Abigail? We're missing any hands. All right, must have been a perfect talk, Abigail.
I would have.
I see Jimmy, sorry.
Yeah, if I was just going to ask, how do you measure success in these areas that are a bit less? I mean, on the climate action and water aspects, I think it's easier. But for the less tangible ones, how do you measure kind of your progress?
Yeah, are there any specifically you had a question on? So for things like the course list, we can measure how successful that is through like analytics on our website and in our newsletter. So we can see how many times people have clicked on them and how long people are staying on the page for that sort of thing. But is there anything else specifically? Because they're all kind of different, and yeah, they're not super tangible. So
yeah, especially the educational efforts would be interesting to know.
Yeah, that is a little bit more of an abstract one. But I think, we can see with increasing enrollment, I think with the Sustainable Triangle Field site, I think Mike just mentioned, there's some larger numbers there this year with the number of students involved. So that's exciting. But I think just like how we're maintaining participation in those sort of activities is a good indicator. But it's definitely something that we should think about and probably write down about how we're going to measure that success.
Yeah, that's a great reminder. The more specific you get in your plan, the more things you want keeping track of well. But yeah, thank you, Jamie. Are there others?
Can I just add to Abigail's answer that Cindy was working on a sustainability literacy assessment, and other universities do this, and this is part of ASHE credits. So Cindy was working on that, so we would actually be assessing students' understanding of sustainability and have actual metrics to go along with that as well.
And some of the other ones are the number of students registered in sustainability related courses, the number of students who get sustainability related degrees. Those are ASHE metrics that we track.
That is a wonderful thing about all the hard work that Cindy does on ASHE, is that it is a treasure trove of information for sure. All right, any other questions for Abigail? All right, hearing none, that brings us to our board member things you want to talk about. So if there are things that folks have going on that you'd like the council to know about, if there are things that you'd like to talk about as a group, issues that are upcoming, that would be great.
I'd love to just do quick 3 sort of little announcements or updates on what's going on the health and medical side. If that's okay.
Absolutely. Yes, please, Julie.
Okay, great. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm doing some work with the Carolina Advocates for Climate Health and Equity, and it's not specific to UNC, but it's a North Carolina organization that reports to a larger national one. And we're working on a virtual symposium, which will take place on April 21st, a Friday afternoon. And it's called Embracing Health and Equity, Embarking on the Road to Climate Smart Healthcare. So we're hoping to start engaging more healthcare people in North Carolina on greening of healthcare. And so hopefully we'll get some healthcare people involved in that. So that's one thing that we're doing. And then there's an entity called Clean Med UNC, which is a school of medicine entity. So I've been working with them to identify people to serve on the student and resident panel. And in doing so, I found out what one group of medical students have been doing in the past month, which is pretty cool. They're starting a pilot project at UNC Family Medicine. So they actually last month did a waste audit at Family Medicine as a pilot project. And they were able to do it fairly quickly with help of housekeeping to measure waste and assess whether the various streams of waste are going in the right places. And so they're going to do some additional audits and then hopefully move forward and start working on some waste management efforts over time. So I think that's a good start to start piloting things in family medicine, because the faculty representative of Clean Meds UNC actually works in family medicine, and the chair is also very supportive. So I think that's another good thing. And then the third is MedWorld. If you're not familiar with them, they've been based at the School of Medicine for quite some time, and they set up bins in hospitals and clinics to collect like single-use instruments and gauze and other things that are in big packets that aren't used. And they can't be used in the US, but they can be used in other countries. So they're sent out to other countries for use. So they're reducing waste in that way. And unfortunately, during the COVID-19 pandemic, they were put on hold. And now that the pandemic is kind of fading away, they're having a hard time getting back and started again. And there are some sort of operational barriers. So Arthur Grabensk, who is a med student doing quite a bit of work with them, the two of us will be meeting with one of the UNC administrators in January after the Joint Commission accreditation visit. So we've got a meeting on the calendar to at least get things started. And Arthur's been reaching out to some other administrators that I've been connecting them with. So hopefully we can get MedWorld back up and running again. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, we appreciate your great work.
Thanks.
It's very exciting. Others?
Yeah, maybe I can add another event to that list. I don't know how many of you guys are aware that the Research Triangle Environmental Health Collaborative will be holding its annual summit this year, January 12th. And that summit will be focused on environmental justice issues within North Carolina related to water infrastructure. And they're actually doing that in response to us. We're the ones who kind of pushed them in that direction. I think many of you know DEQ is getting a large sum of money through the American Resources Recovery Act to address disadvantaged communities and their needs related to water. It's about $800 million. It's a program that they've been trying to put in place. We provided a series of recommendations to them. And this conference was one of the opportunities that we created for DEQ to be able to engage communities around their needs and to have this back and forth conversation then with the folks who'll be providing the money, with the people who will be receiving the money, about how to make that process work in the most effective way for our communities. Mike, thanks to you and a lot of your folks on your side who were really helpful in kind of helping develop the agenda and get that working. But for folks who didn't know, I want to let you know, January 12th, Thursday, it'll be a one-day event. And it'll be at the North Carolina Biotech Center in Research Triangle Park. And there'll be details coming out shortly, but since we might not meet before then, I thought I'd just highlight that for you.
That's great. Thank you, Aaron. And we'll be sure that we share it as soon as we get it with the council so everyone has it. Yeah, that'll be a great event and a hopefully not generational opportunity, but certainly a giant opportunity for sure in terms of improving infrastructure.
Yeah, really complex one too, right? I mean, if Erin were here, she would go into a lot more of the details about, it's not just about extending services, because if you do that, there's a lot of perverse impacts.
Mm-hmm.
And, it gets a little bit to that earlier discussion we had around ESG issues as well. If you go into a community to provide, let's say, access to safe drinking water, are you actually reinforcing systemic inequalities in ways that you didn't realize? And how do you measure some of these very complex political interactions when it comes to the recognition of basic rights for groups and stuff like that? It's really, really challenging.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much. And we will share that a lot so that everyone's aware and hopefully broaden out the community who knows about it. And thank you all for taking the lead on that. It's important to have that thoughtful leadership when giant tranches of money show up. Do we have others?
Yeah, we have an announcement for an event. It's a joint collaboration between undergraduate and graduate student government, Climate Action Day. And it's not official yet, but we have it penciled in for Thursday, April 13th. And essentially, the whole goal of this is just to get students involved and informed about climate action done by student government and by the university at large. So, it'll be covering some of the similar things about the energy transition, but it's also going to be a little bit more broad about, our net zero goals for not just emissions, but also for water and for waste. And we're still working out the details of what the activities are going to look like, but we're thinking a movie screening, a green hackathon, and some other events are going to be included. So yeah, details are to come, but just to put that on everybody's radar early.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ella. And let us know how we can help. We'll certainly help move the information around so more people, everybody, as many people as can know about it. But if there's anything we can do, happy to. That sounds great. Anyone else?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to point out the Clean Tech Summit is going to be amazing this year again. So everybody should be aware of that on March 27th and 28th. The Institute for the Environment and ACES work together on that one. Also, just quickly, Julie, have you worked with the GlobeMed chapter at Gilling School? So they work on global health equity.
Not. We were trying to, for our symposium, we've been trying to connect with other schools, other universities. So I've been connecting with some people at Wake Forest in the radiology department and different things. But yeah, if you've got contacts, we've been reaching out to Duke and Wake Forest and other universities around the state. But I can't say I have, so I'd love.
You've got the #1 public health university sitting right across the street. Come on across. We'll invite you over. We can introduce you to all the folks and make sure that
good.
happens.
And my doctorate's from the School of Public Health. I know, and I've taught in the School of Public Health, but I'm not familiar with that group. So gotta meet them. Thanks.
Walking over. I'll walk you around the hallways.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Great group. They just had reached out and had me come talk to their group at one of their events a couple Saturdays ago. We also, the ACES, the Ackerman Center for Excellence in Sustainability, we have 2 programs that are open to any and all students across campus, undergraduate or graduate, who are interested in getting some extracurricular or co-curricular, depending on how they decide to do it, experience on business and sustainability frameworks and applying them to businesses, and then also in learning blended finance as another tool to use for addressing just about any issue within the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are pretty broad. And so I'd like to invite, if anybody has students who might be interested in these things. One is Business Leadership and Sustainability, BLISS, and that is during the academic year, we provide some training on some sustainability frameworks used in business to any students who want to be involved in this, and help them evaluate and assess North Carolina companies using those frameworks, and also try to encourage them to use it as an opportunity to network and build their professional networks with the companies that they're looking at, so that they can get internships and jobs and things like that afterward. But it's what decides our winners for our annual UNC Sustainability Awards out of ACES. So this will be the 3rd year in a row where we won't know the winner of our own awards until the students tell us who they are. So the BLISS program whittles it down to about 5 to 10, depending on the year, finalists, and they pitch those to our full-time MBA Net Impact chapter, who then determine the winner of the awards. And we find out, and then our awards are on April 28th, I believe, again this year. A Friday, whatever that Friday is. So if you're interested in coming to that too, also let me know. And then the other one, LIFT, Launching Investment for Future Transformation, it's a competition, but it's actually an educational opportunity. We set it up with Bank of America to teach what blended finance is and how it can be used to address social impact and environmental impact issues around the world. And the first year was last year, and it's awesome. We set up educational and coaching opportunities. Don't have to know what the heck blended finance is, which is why I'm not even saying what it is right now. I'll just say it's a combination of public finance and private capital to further the Sustainable Development Goals in terms of this competition. It's free for anybody in the world, undergraduate or graduate. So last year's winner was from St. Gallen University in Switzerland. 2nd place, they were master's students. 2nd place were freshmen and undergrad from NYU, to give you an idea of the breadth. And we've had schools from all over the world right now coming to our info sessions. Our first training session with Bank of America is December 13th. And so any students who submit a concept note get invited to that. I talked kind of fast. I can put some links in the chat too, in case you have students who are interested.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah, everyone follow up if we have anything. Any others? Not seeing any hands, but feel free to unmute if anyone else has anything.
Hey, so I don't think you're asking me for updates, but I just wanted to ask while we're all in the room together. So as we were planning for Earth Day recently, Abigail had this idea to imitate something that we had experienced at the App State Energy Summit, which was a cash prize for undergraduate research. And so the celebration of undergraduate research occurs just after Earth Day. So we're trying to think of ways to connect to undergraduate research during Earth Month. And so if anyone has any students or knows anybody who is going to present during the celebration of undergraduate research, which is April 26th, when they register, they can check a box now. We just got that added like a couple days ago. They can check a box when they register that their work is sustainability related. And then we're, in the meantime, going to figure out the best way to do judging. And so we'll have 3 cash prizes for second and third prize for the best undergraduate work in sustainability. But the main reason I wanted to bring it up is because we may be tapping into some of you for judges for that competition. But we will be in touch after we sort of figure out some of those logistics.
Melanie, can we take that a step further maybe? Because I'll tell you one of the challenges that I would love a team from UNC to win the Stockholm Junior Water Prize, right? We'd love to be able to get some of there may be, I don't know how we could, maybe if we had a link to some of the major prizes that these teams could actually compete for that goes beyond our university, that might be an opportunity both to highlight the great work we do internationally, but also encourage some of those teams to get more engaged and do more fun stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. We'll think about kind of offline the best mechanism for reaching those students. I mean, it may just be the students who register through us, but I think there's going to be a broader subset of students who aren't registering for the celebration that we can still reach and figure out a way to communicate those prizes to them for sure.
Perfect.
Yeah,
we might even provide some cash to help incentivize this if they're water related activities. So let us know. We can talk about that.
Yeah, we can do both the targeted outreach, the folks who submit abstracts, and then a general outreach to the broader community. I think that's a great idea. Thank you, Erin.
And I guess I'm off mute. And along the lines of the planning for the Earth Day, Earth Month, whatever, and as we think about how to engage the health people, is there some sort of initial planning document that I could take a look at that might help spark some ideas, might help to see what some of the other things are that you've got planned?
We have a document, but Abigail probably does. I'll stop talking.
We don't have like a formal document yet, but we
Scribbles
are
are
meeting
fine.
monthly. What?
Scribbles are fine, bullets,
Okay.
whatever.
Yeah. And we're meeting monthly with like the Sustainability Coalition, which is a combination of student organizations plus operations staff to work on that. So if you also want to invite to that meeting, you can join too.
Sure. Thanks.
All right, anyone else? I'm not seeing any hands. All right, well, thank you all very much. And thank you to everyone. Presentations were fantastic. Appreciate all the council as usual. And we'll share materials from the meeting, and please definitely follow up if you have anything. And I probably won't see everyone, so I hope everybody has a great holiday when it comes.
Thanks.
And we'll be talking soon. Thank you all.
Sounds good. See ya.